says from the Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation.
In this tape, we have shown that there are two classes of taxes, direct and indirect, and that direct taxes are paid by state governments, not individuals. We have also shown that the income tax is an indirect tax in the form of an excise, and that an excise tax is a tax imposed on the manufacture, sale, or consumption of a commodity, on corporate privilege, or on certain privileged occupations. We discussed Supreme Court decisions acknowledging that the income tax is an excise tax. In Madison's notes, we saw the intent of those who framed the Constitution and learned that the Constitution does not authorize either the federal government or state governments to print paper money. We examined Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution that was authored by Roger Sherman to forever bar the door against paper money. We mentioned the powerful international banking interests that benefit from the use of paper money, and showed why the founders were so concerned about the banking interest's ability to influence judges and politicians. We learned that courts do not make law, but we also learned that judges often have political or financial reasons for subverting the intent of the law. And finally, we explained what every first-year law student learns in law school. A law that cannot be understood by someone of average intelligence is void for vagueness.
They didn't know. So what they did was they wrote to the Library of Congress and they asked for a research study. Now in the Library of Congress, they have what they call, right down here, the Congressional Research Service. Because they knew they had to set this up because they got a bunch of people who don't even know what the law is and they got to be brought along. You know, congressmen don't even write the bills. You know who writes the bills, don't you? Who's actually running your government? The staff, right? The lawyers. And they have lawyers working here. This particular one in the Congressional Research Service is Howard Zaritsky. See? And in 1979, he gave his report number 79-131A. Some constitutional questions regarding federal income tax laws. He's a legislative attorney, American Law Division, Library of Congress, Congressional Research Service. His report date is May 25th, 1979. As the 16th Amendment provides that the Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived, without apportionment among the several states, without regard to census enumeration. Zaritsky says in Pershaber versus Union Pacific Railroad Company, Volume 240, United States Reports, which are Supreme Court cases, page 1, year 1916, the Supreme Court held that the income tax, including a tax on dealings in property, was an indirect tax. Yeah, the personal pronoun is missing from the first sentence. Now let's read it with a personal pronoun in the first sentence. Our legal right to ask you for information is Internal Revenue Code 6001, 6011, 6012A, and their regulations, but it doesn't say that, does it? Right? So they're not asking you, are they? It just says that our legal right to ask for information are these code sections, but they're not saying to you. All right? Now let's look at the second sentence. They say that you must file a return or statement for any tax you're liable for. Right? And so that doesn't say that you're liable for any tax. Who makes the determination according to that sentence? You do. It's never been overturned. Pollock still stands. And in 1895, Pollock says the interest and dividends, the tax on interest and dividends of citizens was unconstitutional, a direct tax without apportionment. Within the states, of course, they're talking about.
How many years, though, did it stand, and can the people go back?
How many years it's still standing?
The 3451?
No, that's not standing. Pollock is still standing. The application that goes along with the 1065, which is a corporation return, right, for self-employment, says if I don't file this form K1, then the other limited partners of the corporation are penalized. So I can't have them penalized. And he says, evidently, I have a requirement to file this thing. And I said, well, what does it pertain to? He said, well, self-employment. Now, we're going to show you this a little later on. I said, well, what code section is self-employment? And he said, well, I don't know. I said, well, which code section is it calling for K1? He said, I don't know. I said, well, let's go and look. And so we started looking. Self-employment is section 1401. Does that tell you something? Right? So, and it said enact to increase revenue from imports. And the first Income Tax Act was called, anybody remember? Income Duty.
In this tape, we examined the power to tax and learned that in 1895, the Supreme Court ruled that it was unconstitutional to tax the income of U.S. citizens. Of course, the average American would quickly add that Congress passed the 16th Amendment, as if this changed everything. However, most Americans are unaware that in the case of Stanton versus Baltic Mining, the Supreme Court ruled quite the opposite when it said, the 16th Amendment conferred no new power of taxation. So, if it was unconstitutional to tax the income of U.S. citizens before the 16th Amendment, and the amendment conferred no new power of taxation, then it would be just as unconstitutional to tax the income of citizens after the 16th Amendment. Indeed. We then showed that according to the law, the income of U.S. citizens living and working within the 50 states is not the subject of the income tax. To the contrary, the law requires the income tax to be withheld only from non-resident aliens, foreign corporations, and certain foreign organizations. The law does not require income tax to be withheld from U.S. citizens. This was acknowledged by the government in 1916, when Treasury Decision 2313 was issued by the Commissioner of the IRS to explain that it was the income of non-resident aliens that was subject to the tax, and that it was the responsible heads, agents, or representatives of non-resident aliens that were required to fill out Form 1040 income tax returns for their non-resident alien principals. We also discovered that the government does not need an income tax to raise revenue. It does, however, need some mechanism, real or imaginary, to remove excess paper money from circulation. Because, without such control, the value of paper money would decrease geometrically, just like the Continental. We then showed that the term taxpayer, as used by the IRS, is a legal definition pertaining to persons who are made liable for a tax under the Internal Revenue Code, and that persons who are not specifically made liable by statute are not taxpayers as defined by the law. We also examined the government's definition of a tax protester and found that, according to Section 5431.4 of the Internal Revenue Manual, a tax protester is someone who files a return and writes a protest on the return. Such individuals usually protest their legal obligation to file returns and pay taxes. However, if the law does not require you to file a return or pay a tax and you act accordingly, then you can't very well be a tax protester.